The jingle of the bell above the diner's door announced my arrival. I scanned the room, taking in the faded red vinyl booths and the faint aroma of stale coffee and greasy food. This was exactly the kind of place I'd been looking for, somewhere to blend in, to start over without drawing attention. "Just one?" The voice of the middle-aged waitress snapped me out of my thoughts. "Yes, please." I forced a polite smile. She led me to a booth by the window and handed me a laminated menu. "Take your time, hon." As she walked away, I let out a slow breath, trying to shake off the lingering unease that had followed me since leaving Boston. This was a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind. I had to make it work. The bell jingled again, and a man strode in, his confident gait instantly commanding attention. He caught my eye and flashed a smile that made my heart skip a beat. There was something disarmingly familiar about him, like a memory I couldn't quite place. "A new face in town, huh?" he remarked casually, sliding into the booth across from me. I tensed, my guard immediately rising. "Yeah, just moved here," I replied, forcing another smile. "What gave it away?" He chuckled softly, his piercing blue eyes studying me intently. "Oh, just a hunch. Small towns don't get many newcomers." "So, what's your name?" he asked, extending a hand. I hesitated for a moment before taking it. "Alice," I said reluctantly. "Alice Grant." "James," he nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "James Rivers." His grip lingered a beat too long, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more about me than he let on. I pulled my hand back, suddenly regretting my decision to come here. "So, Alice," James leaned back, his gaze never wavering, "what brings you to our little slice of paradise?" I swallowed hard, struggling to maintain my composure. "Just needed a change of scenery," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Ah, I see." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Well, let me be the first to welcome you. I have a feeling we're going to get to know each other real well." As he stood and walked away, I couldn't help but wonder what exactly he meant by that, and more importantly, how much did he already know about the life I was so desperate to leave behind. The next few weeks passed in a blur as I settled into my new life in the small town. I found a job at a local bookstore, relishing the peace and quiet it offered. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, seemed content with my desire to keep to myself. "You've got a real gentle way about you, dear," she remarked one afternoon as we restocked the shelves. "Not like most of the young folks these days." I smiled politely, grateful for her kindness but wary of getting too close. The last thing I needed was to let anyone in, to risk them uncovering the truth about my past. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I stepped out of my apartment, I half expected to see that familiar smirk, those piercing blue eyes studying me from a distance. James Rivers. Our encounter at the diner had left me deeply unsettled, and the fact that I hadn't seen him since only amplified my paranoia. Was he watching me, waiting for the right moment to make his move? Or was I just being paranoid, my past trauma clouding my judgment? One crisp autumn evening, as I was closing up the bookstore, the bell above the door jingled, and there he stood, hands in his pockets, that infuriatingly casual smile plastered across his face. "Well, well, if it isn't the mysterious Miss Grant," he drawled, sauntering toward me. "Working hard, I see." I tensed, my fingers tightening around the stack of books I was holding. "What do you want, James?" He held up his hands in mock surrender. "Easy there. No need to get defensive. I'm just making conversation." "Well, I'm not really in the mood for conversation," I snapped, brushing past him toward the front counter. He followed close behind, his footsteps echoing in the empty store. "You know, you've been awfully hard to track down these past few weeks." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Track down? What are you talking about?" James leaned against the counter, his gaze boring into me. "Oh, come on, Alice. You didn't really think you could just disappear, did you?" My mouth went dry as the realization washed over me. He knew. Somehow he knew about my past, about the life I'd left behind in Boston. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Let's just say I'm a friend of an old acquaintance, and he's been very worried about you, Alice." I felt sick to my stomach, the walls closing in around me. This was it. My past had finally caught up with me, and there was nowhere left to run. My heart raced as James's words sank in. An old acquaintance? There was only one person that could mean Derek, my manipulative, controlling ex-husband who had made my life a living hell back in Boston. "You're working for Derek, aren't you?" I demanded, clenching my fists to hide the tremors running through my hands. James simply shrugged, that infuriating smirk never leaving his face. The man has deep pockets, and he's willing to pay handsomely to get what he wants. "And what exactly does he want?" I spat, feeling a surge of defiance rise within me. "Well, that should be obvious." James leaned in closer, his voice low and menacing. "He wants you back, Alice, and he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants." A chill ran down my spine at the implication behind his words. Derek had always been possessive, convinced that I belonged to him, that he could control every aspect of my life. The thought of being dragged back into that nightmare was almost too much to bear. "Tell him he can go to hell," I growled, standing my ground. "I'm not going anywhere with him or his lackeys." James's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something else behind that casual facade. Anger, maybe even a hint of admiration. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that," he conceded. "But you're playing a dangerous game here, Alice." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, tossing it onto the counter between us. "Derek wanted me to give you these. Said you might need some convincing." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and felt the blood drain from my face. Inside were a stack of photos, candid shots of me going about my daily life here in this small town, shopping at the grocery store, walking to work, even standing outside my apartment building. Derek had been watching me, tracking my every move. "He's not going to stop, Alice," James said, his voice taking on a softer tone. "He's obsessed with you, and he's got the money and resources to make life very difficult for you if you don't cooperate." I looked up at him, my eyes brimming with tears of frustration and anger. "So, what? I'm just supposed to give in? Let him control me again?" James held my gaze for a long moment, and I could have sworn I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Sympathy, maybe? "Look, I'm just the messenger here," he said finally. "But if I were you, I'd think long and hard about what's really important. Because Derek Wallace doesn't take no for an answer." With that, he turned and walked out of the bookstore, leaving me alone with the weight of his words and the sickening realization that my past had finally caught up with me. That night, as I tossed and turned in bed, memories of my life with Derek came flooding back, unbidden. The way he had slowly but surely isolated me from my friends and family. The constant put-downs and criticisms, chipping away at my self-worth until I was a mere shell of my former self. And the rage, that terrifying white-hot rage that would flare up at the slightest provocation, leaving me cowering in fear. It had started out so innocently, like it so often does. Derek was charming and attentive, sweeping me off my feet with grand gestures and lavish gifts. But as the months went by, the cracks began to show, the possessiveness, the jealousy, the need to control every aspect of my life. "You're mine, Alice," he would growl, his grip tightening around my wrist until I winced in pain. "Don't you ever forget that." And I didn't. How could I, when every day was a constant reminder of the power he held over me? The threats, the intimidation tactics, the promises of what he would do if I ever tried to leave. But one night, after a particularly brutal outburst that left me bruised and broken, something inside me finally snapped. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly walking on eggshells, fearing for my safety and my sanity. So I ran. I packed a bag and slipped out in the middle of the night, leaving behind the luxurious prison Derek had built for me. It wasn't easy. He had eyes and ears everywhere, people loyal to him and the wealth he commanded. But I was determined to start over, to build a life for myself far away from his reach. And for a few blissful weeks, I thought I had succeeded. I found a job, a place to live, and started to piece together the shattered fragments of my life. But then James showed up, shattering the fragile illusion of safety I had constructed. As the sun peeked through my bedroom curtains, I made a decision. I couldn't keep running, not anymore. If Derek wanted a fight, then that's what he would get. I would stand my ground and face him head-on, no matter the cost. With a newfound sense of determination, I threw back the covers and got dressed. There was someone I needed to see, someone who could help me take Derek down once and for all. The crisp autumn air stung my lungs as I made my way through the deserted park, my footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. This was it, the confrontation I had been both dreading and anticipating. I had left James a terse message, demanding to meet on my terms. Surprisingly, he had agreed without argument. As I rounded the corner, I saw him sitting on a bench, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. He looked up as I approached, that infuriatingly casual smirk playing on his lips. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I want you to leave me alone, James, and I want you to tell Derek that I'm not going back. Not now. Not ever." He raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by my bravado. "Is that so? And what makes you think either of us is going to listen to your demands?" "Because I have information," I blurted out, my heart pounding in my chest, information that could ruin Derek if it ever got out. That seemed to catch his attention. He sat up straighter, his gaze sharpening. "I'm listening." I took a step closer, my voice low and urgent. "Derek has been embezzling money from his company for years, funneling it into offshore accounts, using it to fund his lavish lifestyle and keep his mistresses happy." James's eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. "I have proof," I continued, my confidence growing. "Bank statements, wire transfers, the whole 9 yards. If that information ever got out, it would destroy him." For a long moment, James was silent, considering my words. Then, to my surprise, he let out a low chuckle. "You've got balls, I'll give you that," he said, shaking his head. "But you really think Derek is going to let a little thing like embezzlement stop him? The man is obsessed with you, Alice. He'll stop at nothing to get you back." I clenched my jaw, refusing to back down. "Then I'll go public with the information. Let the world see the kind of man he really is." James leaned back, studying me with a newfound curiosity. "You know, when I first took this job, I thought you were just another spoiled rich girl running away from her problems. But now—" He trailed off, his gaze lingering on me. "Now I'm starting to think there might be more to you than meets the eye." Before I could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made us both turn. My heart stopped as a figure emerged from the tree line, a figure I knew all too well. "Well, well," Derek drawled, his eyes cold and calculating as they fell on me. "Isn't this a cozy little reunion?" My heart pounded in my chest as Derek stepped out from the shadows, his expensive suit crisp and immaculate as always. Despite the chill in the air, I felt beads of sweat forming on my brow. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice shakier than I would have liked. Derek's lips curled into a condescending smile. "Is that any way to greet your husband, Alice? After all the trouble I've gone through to find you?" I flinched at the word husband, a bitter reminder of the chains I had so desperately tried to break free from. "We're not married anymore, Derek," I spat. "Not after what you did." His eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the monster that lurked beneath that polished exterior. "You're mine, Alice," he growled, taking a step closer. "You always have been, and you always will be. This little game of hide-and-seek ends now." I instinctively backed away, only to feel James tense beside me. To my surprise, he had risen to his feet, positioning himself between Derek and me. "I think the lady has made her position pretty clear," James said, his voice low and even. "She doesn't want anything to do with you." Derek's gaze flickered to James, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "Ah, yes, the hired help. Tell me, how much is my dear wife paying you to play the knight in shining armor?" James didn't rise to the bait. "This has nothing to do with money. Alice is her own person, and she has the right to make her own choices." For a long moment, the two men stared each other down, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, to my astonishment, Derek threw back his head and laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You really have no idea who you're dealing with, do you?" he sneered, turning his icy glare back to me. "Alice belongs to me, and I'll do whatever it takes to get her back." With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized what he was implying. Derek always had an ace up his sleeve, some leverage or damaging secret he could use to bend people to his will. "What is it this time, Derek?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What twisted game are you playing?" His smile was chilling. "Let's just say I have a little something that could make your life very, very difficult if you don't cooperate." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. But we can discuss that later. For now, I think it's time we went home, don't you? I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my lips as Derek's hand moved ever so slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something metallic peeking out from beneath his jacket. A gun. The world seemed to slow to a crawl as Derek's hand moved towards the gun tucked into his waistband. My heart hammered in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this man as possible. But before either of us could react, James was on him, grabbing Derek's wrist and twisting it behind his back with a sickening crack. The gun clattered to the ground as Derek let out a howl of pain. "You son of a bitch," he spat, struggling against James's iron grip. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" "I'm dealing with a coward who threatens women with guns," James growled, his face contorted with fury. "A pathetic excuse for a man." With his free hand, Derek reached into his jacket, no doubt going for another weapon. But James was faster, delivering a vicious blow to Derek's midsection that doubled him over, wheezing. "Alice, run," James barked, his attention momentarily diverted. It was all the opening Derek needed. With a feral snarl, he wrenched himself free and lunged at James, the two men grappling viciously on the ground. I stood frozen, paralyzed by the brutal scene unfolding before me. "Go!" James shouted again, his voice strained as he fought to keep Derek at bay. "Get out of here!" Snapping out of my daze, I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the pavement as I fled the park. Branches scratched at my face and my lungs burned, but I didn't dare slow down, not until I had put as much distance between myself and Derek as possible. Finally, gasping for breath, I stumbled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, collapsing against the rough brick wall. My mind raced, replaying the events of the night over and over again. James had saved me. The man I had initially mistrusted, the one I thought was just another pawn in Derek's twisted game, had put himself in harm's way to protect me. And now, who knew what Derek was capable of doing to him? The thought made my stomach churn, and I knew I couldn't just leave him to face Derek's wrath alone. Not after what he had done for me. Stealing my resolve, I pushed off from the wall and made my way back towards the park, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. As I drew closer, I could hear the sounds of the struggle, grunts of exertion, the dull thud of fists connecting with flesh. And then, silence. I rounded the corner, and the sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. James lay motionless on the ground, a trickle of blood running from a gash above his eye, and standing over him, chest heaving, was Derek, his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "Well, well," he sneered, turning his icy glare towards me. "Look who decided to come back." My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at Derek, his face twisted into a sneer of triumph. James lay motionless on the ground behind him, and a wave of guilt and fear washed over me. This was all my fault. If I had just gone back with Derek like he demanded, none of this would have happened. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" Derek spat, taking a menacing step towards me. "Had to go and play the hero. Try to take me down." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. What could I possibly say to reason with this man, this monster who had haunted my every waking moment for so long? "I'm done playing games, Alice," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You're coming home with me, one way or another." A flicker of movement in my peripheral vision caught my eye, and I turned to see James stirring feebly on the ground. Relief flooded through me. He was alive, at least for now. "Don't you dare touch her," James rasped, his words slurred as he struggled to push himself up. Derek let out a derisive snort. "Or what? You'll bleed on me some more." He turned back to me, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "You see what happens when you defy me, Alice? When you try to run?" My mind raced, desperately searching for a way out of this nightmare. I couldn't go back with him, not after everything he had put me through. But I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else getting hurt because of me, either. That's when I remembered the envelope, the one containing all the damning evidence of Derek's criminal activities. With trembling hands, I reached into my pocket and pulled it out, holding it up for him to see. "You want me, Derek?" I said, my voice wavering slightly. "Fine, but first you have to destroy this." His eyes narrowed as he registered what I was holding. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" I countered, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. All that matters is what's inside, enough to bury you for good. For a long moment, Derek was silent, weighing his options. Then slowly he extended his hand. Give it to me. I shook my head defiantly. Not a chance. You destroy it first, then I'll go with you. No tricks. A muscle twitched in Derek's jaw, but he seemed to realize he had no other choice. With exaggerated care, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek silver lighter. Our eyes locked as he flicked it open, the tiny flame dancing in the evening breeze. After you, I said, nodding towards the envelope. Derek's lips curled into a sneer, but he did as I asked, touching the flame to the corner of the envelope. The papers inside caught fire instantly, and he dropped it to the ground, watching impassively as the evidence went up in smoke. There, he said, grinding the ashes beneath his heel. Now come along, like a good girl. I felt sick to my stomach, but I had no other choice. Squaring my shoulders, I started to move towards him, my heart heavy with dread. That's when I heard it, a faint ringing sound coming from the bushes nearby. Derek froze, his brow furrowing in confusion. Then, to my astonishment, a figure emerged from the shadows, holding up a sleek black phone. You really should be more careful with your secrets, Derek, a familiar voice rang out. You never know who might be listening. Mia?